everybody. We are today's Amud is Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're starting with the Mishnah, which is already 5 lines down on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. And Be'ez Hashem, we're going to finish the parak today, and Wednesday start a new parak. So it's big news, huh?
Should have made a cake.
Yeah.
Also good.
Okay. So this Mishnah really talks about things which are not really directly connected to Eidim Zoimim per se, and I think some of the Rishonim, they discuss why this Mishnah comes over here B'chlal, but to do with Eidus in general. So the Mishnah starts off, Misha Nigmar Dinoi, Uvarach, Uval Ifnei Oisi Bezdin, Ein Soisunes Din. The Mishnah says that someone whose din was there was a Gemar din, right? Someone was a Gemar din that someone was Chayiv Misa or otherwise Chayiv. So Uvarach, Uval Ifnei Oisi Bezdin, Ein Soisunes Din. If he runs away and then he comes back in front of the same Bezdin, and he says, I'm back over here. Ein Soisunes Din, they don't cancel his original din and say, okay, we'll look through the case again because you're back over here. But rather, they straight away take him, whatever the Gemara din was, they pass him straight away. Now, I just have to point out over here, the Mishnah is talking about a specific case, meaning there's a Mefurish Mishnah in Sanhedrin which says, that at least by din in Nefashas, even if they're taking him out to the slaughterhouse, I was going to say, even if they're taking him out to the Beis Haskida, they're taking him out to be killed. If he, or even if someone else, or even if he comes and says, Yeshli Zchus, I have an argument, I have a time, they actually take him back. So there are definitely certain instances in which they do go back and socialist, if the right word is socialist, but they go back and they re-look into the case. Over here, we're talking about a situation. The guy's not, the Nidin isn't coming back. Let's say it's still in the Pashas. The Nidin isn't coming back and saying, I'm coming back to Bezin and I've got, you should know, I'm here, but I've got an argument why I'm Zakai. No, in such a case, for sure, they would look back into it. They would look into it. That's always the case. Here, it's just a situation where he comes back to Bezdin and he wants a retrial because he's back, and he's saying he wants him to look into it again. He doesn't have any specific new argument which he's bringing forth to Bezdin. In fact, the Mefarshim ask, what's to have him in? Obviously, Ein Soishin is in. Why should they, just because he ran away, so he comes back? So there should be some sort of situation because he ran away and came back. They should look into it again. So many Mefarshim actually explain that that's part of the Gemara's Kasha. When the Gemara asks to steer between the Reish and the Sefer, we'll soon see part of the Gemara's Kasha included in the Gemara's Kasha. When we get there, I'll explain it that way. Is taka what the Chiddush is in the Reisha. Why would I have thought that Soishin is dinner? Okay, that's the first din of the Mishnah. But if he comes back to the same Bezdin, Ein Soishin is dinner. Now the Gemara says another din. In any situation where 2 Eidim come along, now we're not talking about the same Bezin, we're talking about different Bezin. So you need Eidim. 2 other Eidim come along and say that this guy, this Nidin, was Nigma Dina Bevezin Shalplaini. He already was paskin. There was a conclusion of the Bezdin to kill him or whatever it may be. Yeah, here we're talking about killing from the Hemshech HaMishnah's Mashmaza. Yeah, Idman is playing Nigma Dina Bevezin Shalplaini or Plaini Edav Harizayhar. Any situation where 2 Eidim come along and say that, you know what, Reuven was Chayiv Misa in another Bezdin, Harizayhar. In other words, they trust the Eidim who say that there was a Gemara din, and they straight away kill him. They don't go into it and look into it further and further. Some Mefarshim I'll point out that you have to also say Ploini or Ploini Eidav, because you need to be able to say who the Eidim are so that they could still be Eidu Shata Yochel Azim, or they could technically be made Zoimim. You have to say who the other Eidim were in the first Bezdin, assuming now that's 2 different Eidim. Okay, right to the Mishnah continues with what seems to be a separate discussion totally. Sanhedrin noyeg is ba'aretz of the chutzlaretz. The Sanhedrin is noyeg both in Eretz Yisrael and in chutzlaretz. And here also you have to explain that it doesn't mean it's only really the Sanhedrin. When do the Sanhedrin kill? Only, in other words, even in chutzlaretz, they only kill bisman that there's a Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael. So when we say Sanhedrin noyeg is ba'aretz of the chutzlaretz, what we mean to say is that when the Sanhedrin is in Eretz Yisrael and is being damned in the Nefashis in Eretz Yisrael, when it's still, so then even in Chutz La'aretz, they're doing the shlichus of the Sanhedrin. They can also be damned in the Nefashis, and they're kind of like the shluchim, they're kind of like the extension of the Sanhedrin. But once the Sanhedrin stopped existing, right, which was already before the Churban Abayis, 40 years, I think. then they weren't able to be done, not in Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz La'aretz. But at the time when the Sanhedrin was in Eretz Yisrael, so they were noig in Chutz La'aretz as well. And finally, another topic totally about how often it's appropriate for Sanhedrin to be dandin in the fascists, to not be dandin, but to kill people, to execute people. So here's the famous, I think the same Mishnah is in Sanhedrin as well, if I remember correctly. Sanhedrin ha'yireges echad b'shavua nikris chavlanis. Tanakama says a Sanhedrin who kills somebody once in a shavua, over here shavua doesn't mean once a week. It means once every 7 years, is called a chavlanis, it's called a murderous bezdin. In other words, a Sanhedrin who kills even as much as once in 7 years is considered too often. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says echad l'shivim shana, once in 70 years. The Gemara is going to explain whether this means once in 70 years is also considered too much, or once in 70 years is considered normal. But either way, the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying no, even more. It's not just called chivlanis if it's once in 7 years. Really, a bezdin shouldn't be killing more than once in 70 years, or if it kills once in 70 years, that's okay, but not more than that. And finally, finally, we have Reb Tar from Reb Akiva. Reb Tar from Reb Akiva, they say, if we were in the Sanhedrin, we wouldn't have killed a person ever. In other words, this whole, I guess, the whole din in the Pashas is like in theory. The Torah tells us that you kill people, it's in theory, but in practice, we would make sure to never kill anybody or try our best to almost never kill anybody. Farshim talk about Akapanim, you take the Reb Tar Kiva literally, it sounds like they're saying that we will never kill anyone. Reb Shimon Gamliel responded, Reb Shimon Gamliel, that they would too. Yes, exactly. Yes. And even the Tanakhama is quite limited, right?
No, further, it's also about that they're abolishing the death penalty by there's not only din. They're saying we would make sure it doesn't happen. Like a governor who refused to sign the death penalty.
Even though Ba'atzim it's there.
You know, it was ruled and he has to sign off on it.
No, they're not saying that. They're saying that we would make sure that they wouldn't come to the ruling. But yeah, they too would be marbe shayf chidam Yisrael. Meaning it's a very nice idea. It's a very nice idea that you don't want to kill people, but by not killing somebody, I see some Mepharshim say it directly. It's like you're almost being hypocritical, because what are you worried about? You don't want to kill somebody. But if by you not killing the guilty people, there's going to be more murderers who are not afraid of, right? Because the Mefarshim ask a kasha, what do you mean, Afin Marbim Shayf Chidam Yisrael? L'chura, Afin Marbim Mechalei Shabbos, Afin Marbim Bala, right? All the Chayvim Misa they're going to be encouraging. So they say they weren't, so it's different Mefarshim. Some say they weren't so worried about that. That's been Ad Lamakam. They're not, we don't have to be so worried about that. That's the Eibish's Cheshbon, so to speak. But Shayf Chidamim is a problem. And some add the Knech that no, it's not just that Shayf Chidamim has been Ad Lachaver and they're worried about society kind of running you normally, but it was a time that directly to Reb Tar from Reb Akiva. You Reb Tar from Reb Akiva saying because you're so worried about not killing anybody, you don't want Sfichas Damim to happen, but by doing so, you're doing the exact opposite of what you want. You're being married b'shayf chidam b'Yisrael. Okay, that's the Mishnah. That's the Rashi. If it's in front of the same bezin, you don't go back to go back and to be done, to go backwards and forwards about the din that maybe the guy will be zoicha this time. And like I said, it's hard to understand what the Gemaras have in it, what the Mishnahs have in it. Of course, Pashat ain't soisin is dinner because he ran away and came back. You should redo it, retrial. We'll deal with the questions soon. And then finally, Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Akiva say, "Ilo hayinu b'Sanhedrin." If you were in the Sanhedrin, so Rashi says something interesting over. Ilo hayinu b'yomim shas Sanhedrin donu din in the fashists. If we were there, he kind of touches the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't need any explanation. If we were in the Sanhedrin, we weren't in the Sanhedrin. If you were in the Sanhedrin, lo yinehar gadol ma'ila. But Rashi says something interesting. Yeah, Ilo hayinu b'yomim shas Sanhedrin donu din in the fashists. If we were around in those days when the Sanhedrin were donu din in the fashists, lo yinehar ba'adam. So the Rishonim explain. And this is the Chor Pshat and Rashi as well, that Reb Tar from Akiva did live at the end of the Chor Habayis, and there was a Sanhedrin, and according to some, maybe they even sat on the Sanhedrin. So Rashi is coming to explain that the Chor where the Mishnah is not moving. Ilo Yinu b'Sanhedrin, they were in the Sanhedrin. So Rashi is explaining, meaning they weren't in the Sanhedrin when they sat in the Sanhedrin was already after they were done Chayve Mises. I think the Sanhedrin moved to Yavna. Sanhedrin, the last 40 years.
Sanhedrin only works when they're sitting on their place. English discusses. Otherwise, it's not.
They can't be done in the fashas. They can be done other things, maybe, yeah. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi is obviously bothered by the question. What do you mean? If someone's chayav misa, he's chayav misa. So how would they get around it? So as it's going to be explained in the Gemara that they asked the Edom questions which the Edom had no idea how to answer, and once they asked the Edom questions that they didn't know how to answer, so that's mevatel the din.
Right. Yeah, they're being mevatel.
One second, just finish the Rashi. If they would do so, they would be married b'sheif chidamim because they wouldn't be afraid of bezdin. Yeah, what are you saying?
And they're being mevatel din. They're consciously being mevatel din. They're not. They're going to an extreme that is not necessary for them to go to.
Who's saying that?
According to the way Rashi is explaining, right?
No, yeah, that's true. But Rashi's trying to just explain how they managed to put it off. If someone's chayav misa, so they asked crazy questions, which through that they wouldn't know what to answer. We'll see in the Gemara exactly what they asked and how this fits in with this Rashi over here. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. So the Mishnah really had essentially three different subjects. One is when you come to another. When you come again, if someone runs away before the Gemara and then comes back to the same bezdin or to another bezdin, do we redo a retrial? And basically we said no. Then we had the din that Sanhedrin is noyeg both in Eretz and Chutz La'aretz. And finally, about how often the Sanhedrin it's appropriate for them to kill. Ultimately, with Rabbi Taf and Rabbi Kiva saying that we would never kill anybody if you were in the Sanhedrin. Says the Gemara. So first of all, the Gemara addresses a stira. Al-Khura, the Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, which says Misha Nigma Dinu Varach Uval Lifnei Oisei Bezdin Ein Soisnis Din is mashma that what? That only Lifnei Oisei Bezdin. Only if he comes back to the same Bezdin, so then Ein Soisnis Din. But if it were another Bezdin, so then the other Bezdin would say, okay, we didn't. Huh?
Why would that even be a question?
What do you mean?
They know exactly what happened. They were the ones who passed.
That's exactly what I was saying earlier. No, 100%. That's what I was saying earlier. What's the chiddush? So many Mefarshim explain that this is part of the Gemara's kasha even. Now, like when it's asking a steer from the ratio to the sefer, it's also understanding. It's also part of it's what's bothering it is not just the steer between the ratio and the sefer, but also why Oisei Bezdin would make a difference. Like the Gemara's Teretz, Ilataka explain that. But you're right. At first, 100%. At first glance, the Mishnah Bichlal doesn't make sense. It's hard to understand. Yeah, what's pshat ein sois mizini coming back to the same Bezdin? But the Gemara, the way it asks the kasha, is that l'chura you can make a deal. If they Oisei Bezdin who the ein sois. It's mashma from the Mishnah. They come to the same bezdin, then ein soisin. You don't do a retrial. You don't cancel the original din. Halifnei bezdin aches soisin is mashma that were it to be another bezdin, right? So why just lifnei oisa bezdin? There's mashma if it was another bezdin, then soisin. In taka, you would cancel the din and then kind of do a retrial and kind of look into the case again to see if you can let the guy off. So Gemara asks hatani sefer, but we learned in the sefer straight away afterwards. We learn otherwise. We learn the Mishnah says kol makom sheyamdu shnayim b'yom rumidan on esish pleni. Shenigma dinner beveised plenty Adol. Harry's an Eric. The Mishnah straight away says immediately afterwards that even in another bezdin, if two Adam come along and say that Pliny was Nigma dinner beveised shal Pliny or Pliny Adol, and those words Adam, so then Harry's Ayari, which is mashma that even in another bezdin, if he's brought to another bezdin after running away, after somehow getting away from the first bezdin, he's still killed. So the Chor's a steer, and the ratio is mashma only in that bezdin, but not in other bezdin. And in the next case, what we call the sefer, is mashma always. So you always kill the person without going back into the din. So Abai says lo kasha kan be'eretz Yisrael kan b'chutz la'aretz, which I'm going to explain as being like this: that in Eretz Yisrael, so then it depends. In Eretz Yisrael, in other words, in another bezdin it depends. If it's Eretz Yisrael, so then since it's Eretz Yisrael, we'll soon see why we do a retrial, and that's the diuk of the Reisha, right? In other words, the Reisha is talking about Eretz Yisrael, where the Reisha says Mishaning Madinu Uvarach Uval Ifnei Oisa Bezin Ein Soishin is Dino. He's talking about Eretz Yisrael, right? And in that case, were it to be another bezdin, we would we do a retrial, and there's a chiddush involved over here. Some we'll soon see. And the Hemshech Mishnah, where we say that we never do a retrial, even if it's another bezdin, that's talking about chutz la'aretz, right? The Tani we learned in the Brisa, and now we bring a Brisa to support this notion that there's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. Rabbi Yehuda ben Dostoi, Rabbi Yehuda ben Dostoi said in the name of Rishim Meshatach, Borach me Eretz l'chutz la'aretz. If he ran from Eretz to chutz la'aretz, if he ran from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, ain't soisin as dinner. Then, even if it's another bezdin, we don't cancel the din. But if it's from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, soisin as dinim in nezechus shel Eretz Yisrael. If it's from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, so then we do cancel it. Then we kind of look into it again. What does this mean? It means to say that we think to ourselves, one second, excuse me. What's the svara to do a retrial, to not do a retrial? What's the svara to do a retrial or not to do a retrial? L'chora, it's already been nigmad in. They look through everything. They paskin that the guy's chayav misa, right? So why should you do a retrial? It's not like the guy's coming and saying, I've got an argument. There's nothing new. So you're right. If there's nothing new, there's no reason to think that there's anything new over here, then you don't do a retrial. And that's why in Chutz La'aretz Takaway, even if it's another Bezdin, you don't do a retrial because you trust the fact that the first Bezdin did its due research, came to Kamagdin, and that's it. When it's from when it's in Eretz Yisrael, where the new Bezdin is in Eretz Yisrael, so then we say to ourselves, look, there's reason to believe that maybe the Bezdin, if they go back into it, will find some new zuchus. What's pshat? It's chus shel Eretz Yisrael. It's like a spiritual thing that because in Eretz Yisrael, whether it's Abir Eretz Yisrael Machkim, that the Dayanim are smarter, I don't know what's pshat exactly, but there's a chus in Eretz Yisrael that they'll be able to find. There's a possibility they'll be able to find the zuchus. And then that's the chiddush of the same Bezdin.
You don't need to have anything to go on.
No, they do look through it again. They just go through the proceedings again. And then that answers the first question as well. You asked the question, yeah, what's the chiddush of the Reisha? The chiddush of the Reisha is that if it's in Eretz, many Rishonim learn, that if it's in Eretz Yisrael and it's the same Bezdin, ain't Seishon as them. The same Bezdin, what are they going to, they've already been through it all. Even though it's in Eretz Yisrael, even if the Bezdin moved from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, they say such an akimta, right? Even if the Bezdin was originally Chutz La'aretz, but the same Bezdin moved from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, but if it's the same Bezdin, ain't Seishon as dinner. And only if it's another Bezdin, so you have the combination of the fact that it's another Bezdin and it's in Eretz Yisrael. So then it's chus shel Eretz Yisrael, says Rashi, Ulai toyu limsa loy pesach shel zuchus. Okay. And the Lefizeh, by the way, many Mefarshim explain that that's the connection to the next din of the Mishnah, which seems to be totally out of place over Sanhedrin Noyagas Ba'aretz of Chutz La'aretz, besides for not having anything to do with Eidim Zomim in general, but it doesn't have anything to do with the piece before, the piece after. Masha'en Kain, based on the Kimta of Abaya, who explained that the beginning of the Mishnah is actually saying two different dinim. Mishnah is talking about in Eretz Yisrael, right? Yeah, according to Abaya's Kimta, the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about Eretz Yisrael. Mishnah, right? The Oisei Bezin ain't Seishon is dinner, but were it to be another Bezin you work. And the next din, Kol Makom Sheyam, is talking about Chutz La'aretz. But any place where it's where even right outside of Eretz Yisrael doesn't make a difference, the same Bezin or not. So then we understand the Hemshech. Sanhedrin Noyagas Ba'aretz of Chutz La'aretz. We understand the connection upon him. That the next piece of the Mishnah is connected to the first. So that's what it says. Sanhedrin Noyagas Ba'aretz of Chutz La'aretz. Minohani Mili. Where do we learn this din that Sanhedrin is Noyag both Ba'aretz and Chutz La'aretz? So it says the Gemara, the Tan Rabban. We learn in the Brayso as follows. V'hayu. Let's just see where the pasuk is. The pasuk is in the context of being done in a fascist. I can't remember now. I'm pretty sure it's about the judges, about the Torah. Yeah, the pasuk is Tan Rabban. V'hayu eila lachem l'chukas mishpal l'deiriseicha. These halachas about judging should be l'chukas mishpal l'deiriseicha. It should be as a statute. It should be a fixed thing. L'deiriseicha for generations. So it's kind of giving a broad kind of saying that whatever we said till now isn't just in this instance over here, but it's the chukas mishpal l'deiriseicha for all generations. From here we learn the Sanhedrin shenoihagas ba'aretz of Chutz La'aretz. From here we learn that the Sanhedrin is taka noig both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. So now the Gemara says, "Kasha imke mat hamaloyim b'sharecha." Meaning in Shoftim, Hasha Shoftim, the pasuk says, "Shoftim v'shoftim tidincha b'chol sharecha." Sharecha is usually understood to mean Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. So you're telling me that Sanhedrin is noig bein ba'aretz of Chutz La'aretz. The pasuk says, "Shoftim v'shoftim tidincha b'chol sharecha." Sounds like it's only in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara explains that there's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. B'sharecha ta moishiv bati dinim b'chol placho b'chol eir. That in Eretz Yisrael, not only do you have bati dinim in each region, but you also have in each city. In Chutz La'aretz, there isn't a need to dafka have bezdin in every single city. It's good enough just each medina, each region, each area, even if it's a number of cities together, has a bezdin, but you don't need a bezdin in every single city. And that's pshat. That b'chol sharecha you have in Eretz Yisrael, you have in every single city, but in Chutz La'aretz you only need in every plach or plach in every region. The difference. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says, so we explain Atam Moshe Ata Chayev Lahoishiv B'chol Plach Plach. There's a chiyuv in Eretz Yisrael to be Moshe to set up Batei Dinim in every region and in every city. Plach is a prachya. It's like the equivalent of a state, what we call over here, but region, like Yehuda and Gala, like a different region within Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so now we move on to the Sanhedrin Hayregas, the Sanhedrin which kills too often, being called the Chavlanis. The Tanna Kama says the Sanhedrin which kills once every 7 years is already a problem. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says once every 70 years. So the Gemara is unsure whether when Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says Echad L'Shim Shana, whether it's a hemshech to the Tanna Kama. In other words, the Tanna Kama is saying once every 70 years is called Chavlanis, and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah is saying once every 70 years is Chavlanis. Even if he kills once every 70, it's also too much. Or alternatively, no. So Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Echad L'Shim Shana is saying no. Once every 70 years, that's normal. That's fine. That's okay. Says the Gemara. They asked, Achas L'Shim Shana Nikris Chavlanis. Is it pshat in Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah? Does he mean to say that once every 70 years is weiter chavlanis, is weiter murderous, dangerous bezdin? Oidom, or perhaps oirich arahi, no. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah said once in 70 years is normal, and I guess more than once in 70 years is considered chavlanis. Teiku. Gemara says we're not sure exactly what pshat is, and therefore teiku, it just stands as an open question. And finally, we have Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva Oyman. Ilo yinu b'Sanhedrin lo niharig adam mi'olam. And Shimon Gamliel says back, Afin Marbim Shoifchi Dam b'Yisrael. And the way I explained it before is that it's a very geschmack of pshat that Tavra B'Kiva were worrying about killing people too much. Says Shimon Gamliel, what do you mean? You're worried about spilling blood? You are going to be the cause by not killing murderers. There's going to be more murders around because they're not afraid of being killed because they know you have this policy of letting everyone else. Just by the way, why it's not discussed by the Gemara, but it's an interesting. What would Rabbi Azariah and the Tarfon say back to Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Kiva is a very strong. Sorry, what would Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva say back to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is a strong taina. So many Farshim explain that it's well known, it's brought down in Sanhedrin, that like in certain instances where they couldn't kill somebody because they didn't have strong evidence. In other words, they didn't have strong enough evidence. They had evidence, they had strong evidence, but it wasn't evidence. You see a guy walk into a cave and kill, so he comes out with blood on the knife, and there's only one person in the cave before, and you see a dead, he killed him, but there wasn't to aid him, so you can't kill up in Torah. So there's cases in Gemara Sanhedrin says machnis noisel kippah. In other words, that they would dispose of the person. They just wouldn't kill him with one of the aramisas, but they would put him into a cell and let him die of hunger. They would kind of passively kill him. So says so many say that's taka pshat. That we wouldn't actively kill. The Maisa we would, no one wants to get their hands dirty. I mean, I don't know if that's chat. I'm saying,
if you're saving people,
yeah, no, yeah, you're saying
you're anyhow killing them. So do it all for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Others say slightly differently that there's a din there's a din that it's brought down in Chosh Mishpat Simon Gimel. I'm not sure which Gemara it's based on. Chosh Mishpat Simon Beis or Simon Gimel at the beginning of Chosh Mishpat. The Bezin actually have the power, like in the time of Eirah Shah, if they see that to kill people even when it's not according to the rules exactly. So that would be a response. I think usually they didn't want to kill because but were it to be a situation where there was a lot of shayfchei damim, then they would they're basically saying we wouldn't have killed anybody because if there was a situation of a lot of shayfchei damim around, then we would have inserted the Hirah Shah situation where you can kill people even shalei al pideh.
Don't make it worse and don't make it a show.
Yeah.
Here he says that the purpose of the execution is to instill fear in anybody else who would do it.
Exactly.
Basin has to have control.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to do anything, you're not going to punish the
The questions are better than the answer. I'm not going to tell you. I'm just telling you what the Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's got a strong taina back. Yeah. Okay, so let's see right in the Gemara. So the Gemara is bothered by a more practical question. Rather than a philosophical question, or like, hey, how would they have done it? What would they have done? Like what? What do they would be? The Adam would come. There would be the strongest evidence, right? There would be doirish the Adam backwards and forwards, and the Adam's Eidos was fitted in one with the other. Everything fits in like a glove. What are you going to do? You're not going to kill him. What do you mean? What do you mean you're not going to kill him? What would they do to get around this? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, the two Amiram, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar said that they would ask the following: Re'isam treifa harek shalim harek. They would ask a kasha as follows. They would ask a question to the Adam. That did you see whether the nerag, the person being killed, was a treifa or shalim? Meaning, there's a din that you're only chai mis if you kill somebody who's a healthy person. But if someone's going to die anyway, you've got a din treifa, meaning he's going to die within the next 12 or 18 months, so then you're not chai misa. So usually, why do we taka? The Gemara taka deals with this in other places. Why taka are we not chayshid every time somebody murders somebody that perhaps he's a treifa? So we say we go basaroi. But apparently, Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara over here is saying, we have to understand how it fits in with the Gemara, that if they would ask whether the treifa harek shalim harek, and somehow the way some Parashim explain is that when you ask whether treifa harek and shalim harek, and the Adam don't know what to answer, so then that invalidates the Eidos. In other words, they would ask this difficult question: was he a treifa and was he a shalim? And then the Adam kind of would backtrack, "Oh, I'm not sure," and that would kind of invalidate the Eidos, and he wouldn't be able to kill anybody. Rav Ashi added, even if they were sure that he was a shalem, the Adam say shalem, they would say, just a second, how can you be so sure? Dilma b'makom. In other words, they said shalem. However, we checked the mace afterwards. We checked to see that there was no illnesses with him. Dilma b'makom sayef nakav. Maybe the place where the sword, where you killed them, there was a hole. Basically, there's many different explanations in the Farshim how to explain this Gemara, but if you going back to Rashi earlier, I would suggest that Rashi is really saying these kashas weren't dafke. These weren't the only questions that they asked. It's examples of questions they asked. Yeah, as Rashi says earlier in the Divrei Maschil, ilu hayinu k'de mefarish b'gmar shebod kwes ha'edim b'dova shelo yadu lahash. It sounds like Rashi's learning that they would ask questions that he didn't know how to answer. L'moshel dilma b'makom sayif nakav. Yeah, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit because the Hemshcha Gemara is maybe not mashed that way. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara straight away asked, very nice by Misa, you got a way out. You asked this question of Duma b'makom Saif Nakav. Maybe he's a treifa, and maybe the treifa was in the place of the Saif, and there would be no way of you knowing whether he was a treifa or not. But by boilas arva, it doesn't make a difference whether the arva is treifa or not, right? So Abai v'Rav Amir Travayu reisim k'mechacho b'shafefaris. That they would say, did you see k'mechacho b'shafefaris? In other words, did you see the bia clearly? So and that's almost impossible to actually see. And therefore, that's how they would get the Baal Arva off the hook. Let's continue for a moment. The Gemara straight away asks, Rabbanan heichi dainu, and if so, how would Rabbanan be done? In other words, if this Gemara is bringing up the point that every single time there's a Baal Arva, the Adam can't really see what's going on. They don't really see yeah. They don't see mamish what's going on. So then how can you ever kill someone for being Baal al-Arva? And then the Rabbanon who said once every 7 years or once every 70 years, how did they ever kill? So the Gemara answers Kishmul. Shmuel says somewhere else, Ataka, there's no need to see exactly. As long as you see Menafim, the people, the Baal al-Arva behave in the way of Niyuf, that's good enough. You don't have to see mamish clear exactly. So let's see Rashi. So here too, there seems to be a lot of discussion, and the Tanakama, are they arguing about whether you need to seek B'chol Shefaris or not? So again, some Rishonim learn, I think, that Yitaka don't need to see B'chol Shefaris, but if the Bezdin ask the Eidim, did you see, and they don't know what to answer, that somehow invalidates the Eidim, even though were you not to ask, you wouldn't have caused the problem. So let's see Rashi first of all.
They don't know to plead the fifth.
Yeah, so Tosfos asks the kasha basically. Why would it make any sense?
In this case, you plead with it. You don't, you're stuck. You're not supposed to see.
Yeah, Tosfos kind of asks a similar sort of question. What do you mean? How can you have such a situation where if we didn't ask you, you'd be chayiv, and now that we asked you? So Tosfos ultimately says another pshat. Tosfos, what does he say? Even when he said loy nehar gadol ma'olam lav dafka loy pam loy yinerek, he would ask a lot of questions. That's kind of the point. Not necessarily, he would ask a lot of different questions, but not that it was impossible to kill them. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says Imtim Tzeloim Shalim Harag, Sheyoimru Bodagnu La'acha Misas Mikol Shmein Es Treifas Ataka. If they said Shalim Harag that they looked from all the different treifas, so then they would say, but maybe Duma B'Makom Sayif Nakavav. And by Baal Arba, what was the case? Reisim Kemichachobish Feferas. The Ein Edim Stagnim Kach. The Edim don't see that it's mamish. The mamish exactly what's going on over there. Feferas Kana Cholush and Noisim by Kachol Kol Einaim. It's a tube. In other words, it's like a tube where you put something in the tube. Mikacholu Kisim Dak, a thin thorn. Shaboy Noitin Atzava Miteichakan. Seems to be that when you use makeup to kind of dye something, they would take a thin piece of wood and they would put it in a tube, and so bia has to be a mamish that you can see it like inserting something in a tube. But Rabbanon the mechayiv misa le'erva hechidayin, and Rabbanon tako mechayiv misa le'erva, how taka they would be done? Be'eza edus heim horgim hoyev alav hachibadki. So Gemara has mishiuru kimenaf mishinhagu ini niyov shashoich mekir basav noigim kederek tashmish. It's good enough just to see them acting and behaving, lying bekir basav and noigim kederek tashmish. That's good enough, and you don't actually have to seek a mechobish v'feretz. Taisvus asks an interesting question. What about other things like Ovid Avodah Zarah, Mechal Shabbos? Other Rishonim ask the same question as well. He says different pshatim. Either it's not so shchiach, or alternatively that taka. There's other questions they could ask. If the Mechal Shabbos was a treifa, then it would also invalidate the edus, because it would be an edus yat yachal azima. Wouldn't be able to. Even though Mechal Shabbos was a treifa, it's chayiv misa, but the Eidim Zoimim wouldn't be able to be chayiv misa for kasha zaman because they never planned to kill a gavrik tela. They planned to kill a gavrik tela. So there was.
So you think so basically with if the person is safe, it really can apply to any business.
The difference being that by Ritzeach, you don't have, even if by Ritzeach, the Nidoin can be a treifa. If the Nidon's a treifa, then the Ritzeach is not chayiv misa. By other Averas, according to Tosfos second pshat, I think it is, then if the Avarian, Mechal Shabbos, or the Ovid Avodah Zarah, if he's a treifa, then that could also invalidate the Eidos, because then it's Eidos Shiat Yachal Azima, because the Eidim. Akopanim, that is the, so we finished the parak. And Bez Hashem, on Wednesday, we'll start new parak, Eilin Agoyim.